David never thought his life would come to this. Sitting in his home office at midnight, staring at a shopping cart full of security cameras on his laptop screen. His finger hovered over the complete purchase button, and he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. 2 years ago, everything made sense. He had Rachel, his wife of 16 years. They had 2 amazing kids, Sophie and Ben. Sure, he worked long hours building his software company, but Rachel was there, holding everything together at home. She was the glue, the heart of their family. Then cancer took her. Just like that, in 8 brutal months, she was gone. David threw himself into work after that. It was easier than facing the empty house, easier than seeing his kids' sad eyes at the dinner table. His company had just secured a major contract worth millions, and suddenly he was traveling 3, sometimes 4 days a week. The money piled up in his bank account, $8 million at last count, but it didn't fill the hole Rachel left behind. He hired Mrs. Chen, a kind woman in her late 50s who came highly recommended. She'd been their nanny for 6 years, even before Rachel got sick. The kids loved her, and David trusted her completely. Mrs. Chen cooked, cleaned, helped with homework, and basically ran the household while David was away. For a while, things seemed okay. Not good, but okay. The kids were grieving, but that was normal, right? They'd lost their mother. Time would heal them. That's what everyone kept telling David. But lately, something felt wrong. It started small. About 3 months ago, David noticed Sophie wasn't talking as much. She used to tell him everything. Every little drama at school, every joke her friends made, every new song she discovered. Now, when he asked about her day, she'd just shrug and say, "Fine," before disappearing into her room. Ben changed, too. His youngest, his little buddy who used to wait by the door for David to come home from trips, now barely looked up from his tablet when David walked in. The kid who used to be afraid of nothing started having nightmares. David would hear him crying at night, but when he'd go check on Ben, his son would pretend to be asleep. David tried talking to them. He really did. He took them out for ice cream, tried to have those heart-to-heart conversations he'd seen in movies. But both kids just stared at their desserts and gave him one-word answers. It was like talking to strangers. Then the grades arrived. Sophie, who'd always been on the honor roll, came home with 2 C's and a D. When David asked about it, she snapped at him, actually yelled, saying he wouldn't understand because he was never home anyway. The words cut deep because they were true. Mrs. Chen pulled him aside one evening after the kids went to bed. "Mr. David," she said in her gentle accent, "I'm worried about the children." "They're not themselves. What do you mean?" David asked, though he already knew. Sophie jumps every time the doorbell rings. "Ben, he's been sleeping in his closet. I found him there twice this week with all his blankets. When I ask why, he says his bed doesn't feel safe anymore." David felt his chest tighten. Did something happen? Did someone hurt them? Mrs. Chen shook her head. "I don't know. They won't talk to me either, but something is very wrong. They're scared of something." That night, David couldn't sleep. He walked through his massive house, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a pool, all the things money could buy, and realized he had no idea what was happening under his own roof. His children were suffering, and he was clueless. The next morning, he found his home office door slightly open. He always locked it. Always. He kept important documents in there, contracts, financial records. David checked the lock. It wasn't broken. Someone had opened it with a key or picked it somehow. He started paying closer attention. His wallet felt lighter one day. He counted, $60 missing. Then 80 the next week. Small amounts, easy to miss, but definitely gone. Sophie stopped eating breakfast. She'd pick at her food, eyes darting to the windows, like she expected someone to jump through the glass at any moment. Ben wet the bed for the first time in years. The 8-year-old was mortified, and when David tried to comfort him, Ben just cried harder and wouldn't say why. David tried everything. He asked if they were being bullied at school. No answer. He asked if they missed their mom. Of course they did, but that wasn't it. He asked if Mrs. Chen was treating them badly. Both kids immediately defended her, saying she was wonderful. So what was it? What was terrorizing his children? He considered family therapy and actually made an appointment. But the therapist was booked out for 3 weeks, and David felt like he couldn't wait that long. Something was happening now, right now, in his house, and he needed to know what. That's when the idea came to him. Security cameras. At first, he dismissed it. It felt wrong, like spying on his own kids. What kind of father does that? But then he thought about Ben sleeping in the closet, about Sophie's failing grades, about the fear in their eyes. What kind of father ignores all that? He did his research. Modern security cameras were incredible. High definition, night vision, motion detection that sent alerts straight to your phone. He could set them up in the common areas. Not in bedrooms or bathrooms, nothing creepy like that. Just the living room, kitchen, hallways, and the outdoor entrances. If someone was coming into his house, he'd see them. If the kids were sneaking out, he'd know. If there was any explanation for their behavior, the cameras would reveal it. David told himself it was for their safety. And it was, mostly. But deep down, he also felt like a failure. A real father would just know what was wrong. A real father wouldn't need cameras to understand his own children. Still, he clicked the purchase button. Next day delivery. The cameras arrived in discreet boxes. David spent a Saturday installing them while the kids were at his sister's house. He mounted them carefully, angling them to cover the main areas. The app was easy to set up. He could now view every camera feed from his phone, anywhere in the world. When Sophie and Ben came home that evening, he showed them the cameras. Just for security, he explained, trying to sound casual. With me traveling so much, I want to make sure you guys are safe. Sophie's face went pale. Ben looked like he might cry. It's okay, David said quickly. They're only in the common areas. You still have total privacy in your rooms and bathrooms. I promise. Neither kid said anything. They just nodded and went upstairs. That night, David lay in bed with his phone on his nightstand, the camera app installed and ready. He felt ridiculous and guilty and worried all at once. He had no idea that in just a few days, those cameras would show him something that would make him question everything he thought he knew. Something that would make his blood run cold and his hands shake as he dialed 911. But that first night, he just stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of father he'd become. The first 3 days were almost boring. David found himself checking the camera app obsessively, sometimes every 10 minutes, but nothing unusual appeared on the screens. He'd see Mrs. Chen making dinner, the kids doing homework at the kitchen table, normal, everyday life. Sophie would curl up on the couch with her phone. Ben would build elaborate structures with his blocks on the living room floor. Regular stuff. David started to feel foolish. What had he expected? Some obvious villain twirling a mustache in his living room? Maybe the kids were just going through a rough patch. Maybe he was overreacting. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And the cameras had night vision, so he kept them running 24/7. On the third night, David was in a hotel room in Seattle going over quarterly reports when his phone buzzed at 2:47 in the morning. Motion detected in the kitchen. His heart jumped. He fumbled with his phone, nearly dropping it as he opened the camera app. The kitchen feed loaded, showing the room in that eerie green-gray of night vision. Sophie was there, standing in front of the open refrigerator. Just a kid getting a snack, David told himself. Teenagers got hungry at weird hours. He used to raid the fridge at midnight when he was her age, but something about the way she moved bothered him. Sophie wasn't casually browsing for food. She grabbed bread and peanut butter mechanically, like she'd done this 1,000 times. Her head kept turning toward the doorway, checking, watching. Even through the grainy footage, David could see the tension in her shoulders. She made a sandwich quickly, wrapped it in a paper towel, and left. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. Efficient, practiced, like she was trying not to get caught. David replayed the footage 3 times, studying his daughter's body language. Why would she be nervous about making a sandwich in her own house? Mrs. Chen wouldn't care if the kids ate at night. David certainly didn't care, so what was Sophie afraid of? He didn't sleep the rest of that night. He kept the camera app open, watching the empty rooms of his house from 2,000 miles away, feeling helpless and confused. The next morning, he called home. Sophie answered, sounding groggy. Hey, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay? Yeah, fine. Why? No reason. Just checking in. How's school? Dad, it's Saturday. Right. Of course. David rubbed his face. Listen, is everything okay at home? You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? There was a long pause. Everything's fine, Dad. I gotta go. Mrs. Chen's making breakfast. She hung up before he could say goodbye. David felt a knot forming in his stomach. That wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. Over the next week, the alerts kept coming. Not every night, but often enough to establish a pattern. David started keeping a log on his laptop, noting every incident. Tuesday, 1:30 in the morning. Ben appeared on the living room camera. The 8-year-old was sitting on the couch in his pajamas, perfectly still, staring at the front door. Not watching TV, not playing, just staring like he was waiting for something. Or someone. David watched for 20 minutes before Ben finally got up and went back upstairs. The whole time his son didn't move, didn't even seem to blink. It was unnatural, wrong. Wednesday night, nothing. Thursday at 3:15 in the morning, both kids. David nearly dropped his phone when he saw Sophie and Ben meet in the upstairs hallway, clearly visible on the camera mounted near the bathroom. They stood close together, and Sophie bent down to whisper something to her little brother. Ben shook his head, then nodded, then looked like he might cry. Sophie put her arm around him, and they whispered back and forth for almost 5 minutes. David turned the volume up as high as it would go, but he couldn't make out a single word. The camera's microphone wasn't good enough, or they were talking too quietly. What were they discussing at 3 in the morning? Why were they both awake? Why the secrecy? David's finger hovered over his phone. He could call right now, demand answers. But something stopped him. If he revealed he was watching them, would they shut down completely? Would he ever find out the truth? He hated himself for thinking like this, for treating his own children like suspects in some investigation. But their fear was real. He'd seen it. Whatever they were protecting him from, or protecting themselves from, it was serious enough to keep them both up at night. Friday morning, David cut his business trip short and flew home. He walked into the house around noon, and the change in his kids was immediately visible. Sophie had dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Ben looked skinnier, like he hadn't been eating properly. Surprise! David tried to sound cheerful. Thought I'd come home early. Maybe we could all go to the movies tonight? Can't, Sophie said quickly. I have a project due. I have a stomachache, Ben added. Not meeting David's eyes, they both retreated to their rooms, leaving David standing in the foyer feeling like an intruder in his own home. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. The worry on her face was evident. Mr. David, I need to talk to you, she said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where David and Rachel used to have coffee every morning. That felt like a lifetime ago. I found Ben sleeping in his closet again, Mrs. Chen began. 3 times this week. When I ask him why, he says his bed doesn't feel safe. What does that mean? Safe from what? David shook his head. I don't know. And Sophie, she barely eats anymore. She pushes food around her plate. Last night at dinner, she jumped so hard she knocked over her water glass when the doorbell rang. It was just a delivery person, but she looked terrified. Have they said anything to you? Anything at all that might explain this? Mrs. Chen twisted the towel in her hands. No, but Mr. David, I've been with this family a long time. I know these children. Something is very, very wrong. They're scared all the time. I can see it in their eyes. That evening, David tried again. He ordered pizza, Sophie's favorite. They sat in the living room, right under one of the cameras, though the kids didn't seem to notice it, and David attempted casual conversation. So, Ben, how's the soccer team doing? Okay, just okay? Didn't you guys have a game last week? We won. Can I go now? Buddy, we just sat down. Come on, talk to me. What's going on? Ben's eyes filled with tears. Nothing's going on. Why do you keep asking? Because I'm worried about you. About both of you. David looked at Sophie. You know you can tell me anything, right? No matter what it is, I'll understand. Sophie's jaw clenched. There's nothing to tell. We're fine. We're just tired of you asking all the time. She stood up. I'm going to my room. Ben followed her like a shadow, leaving David alone with a full pizza and a heart full of dread. That night, David didn't even pretend to sleep. He lay in bed with his phone, watching the camera feeds. Midnight passed. 1 in the morning. Nothing. Then at 1:42 movement, Ben again in the living room. But this time he wasn't alone. Sophie was with him. They sat together on the couch, and even through the night vision camera, David could see they were both crying. Sophie held Ben close, rocking him slightly like Rachel used to do when he was little. They stayed like that for almost an hour, just holding each other in the dark. David's throat tightened. His children were in pain, real pain, and he had no idea why. He wanted to run downstairs, to hold them both, to promise everything would be okay. But he stayed frozen in his bed, watching through a screen like a coward. When the kids finally went back to their rooms, David made a decision. He wasn't going to wait anymore. He wasn't going to watch passively. Starting tomorrow, he'd cancel all his travel. He'd be home every single night. He'd pay attention. But as it turned out, tomorrow would be too late. Because the next motion alert he got, the one that came at 3:07 in the morning while he was stuck in a hotel room 400 miles away, that one would change everything. That one would make him grab his phone with shaking hands and dial 911. That one would show him that his children's fear wasn't in their imagination at all. David was supposed to be in San Francisco for just 2 days. Quick trip, important client meeting, then home. He'd promised the kids he'd be back by Thursday evening. But the meeting ran long, dinner with the clients went late, and by the time David got back to his hotel room, it was almost 3 in the morning. He was exhausted, tie loosened, shoes kicked off, just about to collapse into bed when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Motion detected. Living room. David's first thought was that it was probably Sophie again, making another one of her late-night sandwiches. He almost ignored it. Almost. But something made him pick up his phone and open the camera app. The living room feed loaded in night vision. David's heart stopped. There was someone in his house. An adult. Definitely not one of his kids. The figure was wearing dark clothes, moving through the living room with slow, deliberate steps. Not rushing, not searching frantically like a burglar would. Just walking, looking around. Like they belonged there. David's hands started shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. His mind raced. Mrs. Chen was asleep in her room on the first floor. The kids were upstairs. There was an intruder in his house, and he was 400 miles away. He watched, paralyzed with fear, as the figure moved toward the hallway. Toward the stairs, toward his children's bedrooms. No, 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 David whispered, fumbling for the hotel phone to call 911. But before he could grab it, something about the way the person moved made him pause. They weren't sneaking. A burglar would sneak, stay in shadows, move quickly. This person walked like they knew the house, like they'd been there before. The figure reached the bottom of the staircase and started climbing. David switched camera feeds to the upstairs hallway, his breath coming in short gasps. He should call the police. He should call Mrs. Chen. He should do something. But he couldn't look away from the screen. The person reached the top of the stairs and stood still for a moment, just looking down the hallway. Then they walked straight to Sophie's bedroom door. No hesitation. They knew exactly which room was hers. David's blood turned to ice. The figure stood outside Sophie's door for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Just standing there. Then they moved to Ben's room and did the same thing. What were they doing? Listening? Checking if the kids were inside? Planning something horrible? David was about to call 911 when the person stepped back into the hallway, moving under the light fixture David had installed last year, the one that Rachel had picked out, the one with the soft, warm glow. For just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, the person's face was partially visible. David's entire world tilted. It was James, Rachel's younger brother. His brother-in-law, David, stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. James? That couldn't be right. James lived across town. James had a key to the house, sure, for emergencies. But why would he be here at 3 in the morning? Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe he'd tried to call and David's phone was on silent. Maybe something happened and James needed to check on the kids. But even as David tried to rationalize it, he knew something was deeply wrong. Because James wasn't rushing. He wasn't turning on lights. He wasn't knocking on the kids' doors to wake them up. He was just watching them sleep. David kept watching as James moved back downstairs. The camera showed him walking into the living room, straight to the mantel where family photos were displayed. James picked up a framed picture. David knew which one without even seeing it clearly. It was Rachel's favorite photo of herself taken at the beach 3 years ago, wind in her hair, laughing at something Ben had said. James held the picture for a long time. Then he carefully put it back and sat down in the armchair. Rachel's chair, the one she used to curl up in with her morning tea. He just sat there, in the dark, in a house that wasn't his. At 3 in the morning, David's shock was turning into something else, something cold and angry. What was James doing in his house? Why was he checking on the kids like that? How long had this been going on? The last question hit David like a punch to the gut. How long had this been going on? His fingers moved almost automatically, backing out of the live feed and opening the archived footage. The camera system stored everything for 30 days. If James had been doing this before, there would be evidence. David started scanning backward through the footage, day by day, night by night. At first, nothing. Then, 6 days ago, there, the same dark figure, the same slow walk through the house. The same stop outside the kids' rooms. David's stomach churned. He went back further. 11 days ago, there. 13 days ago, there. 16 days ago, there. James had been coming into the house for weeks, maybe longer. The camera system had only been installed for 12 days, so David couldn't see further back. But he'd bet everything he owned that this had been going on much, much longer. He watched clip after clip, and the pattern was always the same. James would enter through the front door. He had a key, so there was no break-in, no forced entry, sometime between midnight and 4 in the morning. He'd walk through the house, check on the kids, sometimes sit in Rachel's chair for hours. In one clip from 9 days ago, David watched James climb the stairs and actually enter Sophie's room. The camera in the hallway couldn't see inside, but David could see James's shadow in the doorway. He stood there for at least 5 minutes before backing out and closing the door. David thought he might throw up. Another clip from a week ago. James in the kitchen making himself tea, using Rachel's favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that she refused to throw away. Another clip. James standing at the foot of the stairs, just looking up toward the bedrooms for 20 minutes straight. The most recent one, from just 2 nights ago, the night David had been home. Sleeping in his own bed, showed James in the living room at 2 in the morning. He'd walked past David's bedroom door, been in the house while David slept, completely unaware. David's hands were shaking so hard now he could barely hold the phone. Everything was clicking into place. The kids' fear. Sophie jumping at the doorbell. Ben sleeping in his closet because his bed didn't feel safe. The missing money from David's wallet. The office door being unlocked. His children had known. They'd known someone was coming into the house at night, and they'd been too terrified to say anything. Why hadn't they told him? Why hadn't they? But David knew why. He'd been gone so much. Working, traveling, avoiding the grief of losing Rachel by burying himself in business. His kids probably thought he wouldn't believe them. Or worse, they'd tried to protect him because they knew James was family, was Rachel's brother, and they didn't want to cause more pain. David looked at the live feed again. James was still in the living room, now looking at more photos. Moving around the house like he owned it, something inside. David snapped. He grabbed the hotel phone and dialed 911. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "I need police sent to my house immediately. There's an intruder. Someone broke in, and they're near my children's bedrooms." The operator asked for his address, asked if anyone was in immediate danger, asked a dozen questions. David answered mechanically, keeping his eyes on the camera feed the entire time. "Sir, are you at the location?" "No, I'm in San Francisco. But I have security cameras. I can see him right now in my living room." "Do you know this person?" David hesitated for just a second. "It's my brother-in-law." "But he's not supposed to be there. He's been breaking into my house at night for weeks. My kids are terrified." "Please, just send someone. Officers are on their way, sir. I'm also going to need you to call someone at the house to—" "I'm calling my nanny right now." David was already grabbing his cell phone with his other hand, pulling up Mrs. Chen's number. She answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mr. David?" "What's wrong?" "Mrs. Chen, I need you to listen carefully and stay calm. Lock your bedroom door right now. Don't open it for anyone except the police. What? What's happening? James is in the house. He's downstairs. The police are coming. Just lock your door and check on the kids. Make sure their doors are locked, too. He heard her sharp intake of breath, then movement. Oh my God, the children, I need to. Mrs. Chen, please be careful. Just make sure they're safe and stay in your room. I'm going to check on them. Hold on. David switched back to the camera feed. He could see James standing now, heading toward the kitchen. The police should be there any minute. Any second now, he watched Mrs. Chen's door open on the hallway camera. She moved quickly toward the kids' rooms, and David saw her knock urgently on Sophie's door. The door opened, and Sophie appeared, looking confused and frightened. Mrs. Chen said something David couldn't hear, then moved to Ben's room. Downstairs, James seemed to notice something was wrong. Maybe he heard the movement upstairs. He looked toward the staircase, tilted his head like he was listening. Then David saw red and blue lights flash through the front windows. The police had arrived. James saw the lights, too. But he didn't run. Didn't try to hide. He just stood there in the middle of the living room, looking almost relieved, like he'd been waiting to get caught. David watched through the camera as 2 police officers approached his front door. James didn't move. He just stood there in the living room, hands at his sides, staring at the door like he'd been expecting this moment for a long time. The officers knocked hard. "Police, open the door!" James walked slowly to the door and opened it. No resistance, no arguments. He simply stepped aside and let them in. Through the camera's audio, David could hear one officer asking him to put his hands behind his back. James complied without saying a word. Within minutes, they had him in handcuffs and were walking him out to their patrol car. The whole thing was so calm, so quiet. Nothing like the dramatic arrests David had seen on television. Just a tired-looking man being led away in the middle of the night. But what struck David most was James's face in those final seconds before he left the house. He looked back at the staircase, toward where the kids' bedrooms were, and his expression was so sad, so lost. Not the face of a criminal. The face of someone who was deeply, deeply broken. David ended the call with the emergency operator and immediately booked the earliest flight home. 4:30 in the morning departure. He'd be home by 9 if he left for the airport right now. He threw his clothes into his suitcase without folding anything, his mind racing. The whole drive to the airport, the whole flight home, all he could think about was his kids. What had they been going through? How long had they known? Why hadn't they felt safe enough to tell him? The guilt was crushing. He'd been so focused on work, on keeping busy, on running away from his grief over losing Rachel, that he'd completely missed what was happening to his own children. When David finally pulled into his driveway at 8:43 that morning, Mrs. Chen was waiting at the door. Her eyes were red from crying. "The children are in the kitchen," she said quietly. "They've been up since the police came. They won't go back to sleep." David found Sophie and Ben sitting at the kitchen table, still in their pajamas. They looked exhausted, scared, but also somehow relieved. He pulled up a chair and sat down with them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. "I'm sorry," David finally said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. I should have seen it. I should have been here." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Ben stared at the table, picking at a scratch in the wood. "It's not your fault, Dad," Sophie whispered. "Yes, it is. You were both terrified, and I was too busy to notice. Too busy running away from missing your mom to see that you needed me." That broke something in Sophie. The tears spilled over, and suddenly she was sobbing. "We tried to tell you. I mean, we didn't try very hard, but we didn't know how. We didn't know if you'd believe us." Ben started crying too, and David pulled them both close, holding his children while they cried. Mrs. Chen quietly left the kitchen, giving them privacy. When the tears finally subsided, David pulled back to look at his kids. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." "When did this start?" Sophie took a shaky breath. "A few months after Mom died. Maybe 4 months? We heard noises downstairs one night. I went to check and saw Uncle James in the living room, just standing there looking at Mom's pictures. Did he see you?" "No, I hid. I thought maybe I was dreaming or something, but then it happened again a few days later. And again, And I realized it was real. Why didn't you tell me then? Sophie looked down at her hands. He was Uncle James, Mom's brother. You were already so sad about losing Mom, and I thought maybe he was just sad too. Maybe he needed to be in the house to feel close to her or something. I didn't want to make things worse. David's heart ached. His 14-year-old daughter had been trying to protect him. When did it get scary? He asked gently. About 2 months ago, Ben said quietly. It was the most he'd spoken in weeks. He started coming into our rooms. David felt his blood run cold. He came into your rooms? What did he do? Nothing, Sophie said quickly. I mean, nothing bad like that. He would just stand there and watch us sleep. The first time it happened, I woke up and saw him at the foot of my bed. I was so scared I couldn't even scream. I just pretended to be asleep until he left. He did it to me, too, Ben added, his voice small. That's why I started sleeping in my closet. I thought if he came in and didn't see me in bed, maybe he'd just leave. David had to close his eyes for a moment. The image of his children, terrified in their own beds, pretending to sleep while their uncle stood over them. It was unbearable. Did he ever touch you? Ever say anything to you? Both kids shook their heads. A couple times he woke us up, Sophie said. He'd shake my shoulder and ask me questions about Mom. Like, what was her favorite song? What perfume did she wear? What stories did she used to tell me before bed? Really specific things. And the way he looked at me when he asked was so intense. So weird. He told me I had Mom's smile, Ben said. He said it made him feel like she was still here. But it didn't sound happy when he said it. It sounded sad and scary at the same time. Once he told me I looked just like Mom in my nightgown, Sophie continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. That really freaked me out. After that, I stopped wearing nightgowns. I only wore regular pajamas. David felt sick. Why didn't you tell me after that? Or Mrs. Chen? Or a teacher? Anyone? Sophie and Ben exchanged a look. He said if we told anyone, he'd have to tell the court you were a bad dad, Sophie finally admitted. He said you were never home, that you left us alone all the time, that you cared more about work than us. He said he could prove you were unfit and take us away to live with him. He said that's what Mom would have wanted because at least he was around. The words hit David like physical blows. James had manipulated his children, used their fear and their grief against them. And part of it was true, Ben added quietly. You weren't home very much, David nodded slowly. You're right. I wasn't. And that's on me. But Ben, Sophie, I need you to understand something. No matter what, you're my kids. Nobody can take you away from me because of work travel. And even if I was gone too much, that doesn't give anyone the right to come into our house at night and scare you. What Uncle James did was wrong. Very, very wrong. Over the next few hours, the kids told him everything. How James had been coming 2 or 3 times a week. How he'd sometimes sit in Rachel's chair for hours, talking to himself. How he'd go through photo albums, touching Rachel's face in the pictures. How he'd taken some of Rachel's things. A scarf, a book, her favorite coffee mug, and the kids had been too scared to say anything. The money missing from David's wallet? James had taken it. The unlocked office door? James had been in there, going through Rachel's old work files, things she'd kept from her job before the kids were born. Mrs. Chen had been completely unaware. She slept deeply, and her room was on the opposite end of the house. James had been careful to only come after she'd gone to bed and leave before she woke up. Later that day, a detective came to the house to take statements. She was a kind woman named Detective Rodriguez who was gentle with the kids but thorough in her questions. After interviewing everyone, she sat down with David privately. Mr. David, I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. Your brother-in-law has been charged with criminal trespass and stalking. Given that children were involved and he entered their bedrooms, the charges are quite severe. What happens now? He's being held pending a psychiatric evaluation. From what we've gathered so far, it appears Mr. James has been experiencing a severe mental health crisis since your wife's passing. He lost his job about 4 months ago, was evicted from his apartment 6 weeks ago. He's been living in his car. David's head snapped up. What? I had no idea. He never said anything. It seems he was hiding a lot. His employer said he'd become erratic, couldn't focus, kept talking about his sister. His landlord said he stopped paying rent, stopped taking care of himself. All classic signs of a breakdown. That doesn't excuse what he did to my children. No, it doesn't, but it does explain it. The psychiatrist who did the preliminary evaluation believes he developed what's called a delusional disorder mixed with complicated grief. In his mind, by watching over your children, he was somehow maintaining a connection to his sister. He convinced himself he was protecting them, being the family member who was actually present. David felt a complicated mix of anger and pity. James had lost his sister, his only sibling, and it had destroyed him. But his breakdown had traumatized David's children. What will happen to him? That depends on the evaluation and his lawyer. Likely court-mandated psychiatric treatment, definitely a restraining order keeping him away from you and your family, possibly jail time, though given the circumstances, the focus will probably be on getting him help. After the detective left, David sat down with his kids again. "I'm taking time off work," he announced. "A lot of time. I've already talked to my partners. They're handling everything for the next 3 months minimum." "Dad, you don't have to—" Sophie started. "Yes, I do. You're more important than any business deal. You're more important than anything. I should have realized that sooner." He also told them about the therapy appointment he'd made. Family therapy for all 3 of them, plus individual sessions for Sophie and Ben if they wanted them. "We're going to get through this," David promised. "Together, as a family. The way we should have been doing all along." The first few weeks were hard. Sophie had nightmares. Ben was clingy, afraid to be alone. David had all the locks changed and installed a proper security system with monitoring. He kept the cameras, but now he used them the right way, checking in when he absolutely had to travel for essential meetings, making sure the kids got home safe from school. But mostly, he was just there. Home for dinner every night, helping with homework, actually listening when his kids talked, being present. They visited Rachel's grave together for the first time since the funeral. All 3 of them sat on the grass and talked to her, told her about what had happened, cried together, remembered the good times. "Mom would be so mad at Uncle James," Ben said. "She'd be proud of you 2, though," David said. "You were so brave." "You protected each other." 6 months later, things were different. Not perfect. There were still hard days, moments when the kids got scared, times when David felt overwhelmed by guilt. But they were healing. Sophie's grades came back up. Ben started sleeping in his own bed again. They laughed more, talked more, felt like a family again. James was in a treatment facility, getting the help he desperately needed. David had agreed not to press for maximum charges in exchange for James entering long-term psychiatric care and accepting a permanent restraining order. It felt like the right thing to do, not for James, but for Rachel. She would have wanted her brother to get help. One evening, David found himself sitting in Rachel's old chair, the one James used to sit in during his nighttime visits. But now it didn't feel haunted or sad. It just felt like a chair where he could curl up and read while his kids did homework at the kitchen table. Sophie looked up from her math book. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart?" "I'm glad you put in those cameras." David smiled. "Me too, honey." "Me too." The cameras were still there, but David rarely checked them anymore. He didn't need to, because he was finally doing what he should have been doing all along, being present, being aware, being the father his children needed. Money couldn't protect them. Security systems couldn't protect them. Only love, attention, and actually being there could do that. It had taken almost losing them to learn that lesson. But David had learned it well, and he'd never forget it again.